welcome to the Evoke cast. Today, I'm excited to have a fellow coach and friend on the podcast, Dr. Andy Reid. And Andy's joining us from Canmore, Alberta, Canada. And Andy is a sports med physician at Banff Sports Medicine and avid ultra runner. Andy is just finished the Hard Rock 100 endurance run. And today we're going to talk a little bit about his training in regards to that and his experience there. Just for context, Andy has completed Fat Dog, Black Canyon, the Canadian Death Race, Broken Arrow, Yakima, Western States, Leadville, and he mentioned earlier a plethora of others. So Andy comes to us with a lot of boots on the ground experience. Andy's originally from the UK and hasn't just been a runner. He's dabbled in climbing and many other mountain sports. So welcome to the Evoke cast, Andy.
Thanks, Kylee. I'm excited to be here and talk about one of my favorite things, running.
Good, yeah. So Andy, let's just start a little bit at the beginning. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about how you got into ultra? Because people don't just usually off the couch to ultra. So maybe fill us in.
Yeah, so I grew up in the UK and did all the usual kind of school sports. I would never say I was a particularly great runner on the track or anything like that. I enjoyed cross country, and then I kind of drifted into fell running, which is this slightly peculiar form of British mountain running. And so I did that in my early 20s, enjoyed that, and then moved out to Canada. And I was originally living in Regina, not many mountains in Saskatchewan. So I ended up doing a lot of cycling in Saskatchewan. And yeah, and then I moved out to Canmore in 2003 because I was missing the mountains. Got a job out here, and that's where I continued to dabble in mountain biking. Got into some multi-day stage races. So raced the Transalpine bike race, the BC bike race, the Trans-Rockies bike race a bunch of times. And then I actually had a huge accident. Actually, I had a big crash road racing, and hurt my knee and my shoulder. Had a couple of surgeries, and after that, I found I actually didn't really like riding in a pack of other people on the bike that much. I kind of lost my desire to do that. So then I drifted into I got into adventure racing, so multi-sport racing. I had some friends who were doing it, so multiple day races and involving trail running and kayaking and all that kind of stuff. But I found that I actually enjoyed the long running sections the best. So a friend of mine said, "Hey, you should try trail running." So yeah, I jumped into trail running with 2 feet and ran my first race. I think it was a 50 miler, which is probably not recommended to jump straight into that kind of distance, but I did okay. And then I did 100K later that same year, and did better at the 100K. So I was like, oh well, maybe I do better at the long stuff. So that's kind of how I got into ultra running.
Yeah. Did you find some of those earlier ultra races? Are they still some of your toughest memories? Have they got somewhat easier or smarter with time, or what has been your perception of the progression with ultra running? Because for reference, when I was looking up your results, there's results back over 11 or 12 years ago, right? So it's
Yeah,
been a journey.
yeah. I'm 53 now, and I ran my first ultra, I think, when I was 40.
Yeah.
And I think when you first get into ultras, um, you really don't know what to expect, actually. And I've seen this before. Some of my earliest ultras were actually probably some of my best performances, and I think certainly my first 100 miler that I did, which was Pine to Palm in Oregon. I was scared of the distance, actually. I had no idea if I could actually finish it. And so, I went into that race with a lot of respect. So I started out super conservatively, which is always a pretty good approach, and
Mm-hmm.
actually had a good result in that.
Oh,
So
good.
so
Yeah.
some of my best results were, I was a little bit younger as well, of course. So but yeah, some of my earlier races went quite well. I've definitely
I,
gotten slower as I've aged.
well, I mean, it happens physiologically, things do
Yeah,
decline. But and I mean, as a friend and observing you for many years, you've had really great longevity in this sport, though, which is a bit of an anomaly, I would say, to do
yeah,
decades and decades. So,
yeah.
um, yeah,
I think some of that comes
mhm,
from, I think some of that maybe comes from, I got into that sport, into the ultra running at a later point in my life. So,
yeah,
I suspect had I jumped into ultra running in my 20s, then maybe I would be done by now. But,
hmm
started running these in my 40s, and, maybe
yeah,
with age a little more, I'm a little more sensible.
wisdom, yeah.
Yeah, wisdom.
Has has your training evolved over that decade? Did you make any of the common mistakes of being like, oh, it's such a long distance. I'm just gonna do an insane amount of volume for
Yeah,
leading up. What are
I would,
some training mistakes you've made? Hmm
yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think I think when I first started, it was basically just go out and just go run, just go run long, run it, put in as many miles as you can, spend as
hmm
much time on your feet. And so I definitely did that, and it was very unstructured, I would say. And certainly as I've come along, I have way more structure to my training now than I ever used to. I never used to do workouts. I would never do anything really that I never even thought about specificity, of the races I was doing. I would just go out and, just run.
hmm
And I think when you're younger, that kind of approach can work okay for a while. But
hmm
definitely as I've gotten older, and, you get little niggles here and there, and I have to certainly be a bit more sensible and listen to my body, and
hmm
yeah, treat it with a little more respect. So, and I'm not a particularly high volume runner either. I know there are lots of people
hmm
out there putting. I have a full-time job. I have a busy life.
Yeah.
So, I can't be doing 100-mile weeks. They would destroy me anyway. But I just don't have the
hmm
time. So I try and
Now,
get.
putting on your coach hat, Andy, how do you think that's like physiologically possible? Do you think you have a big aerobic base from years of training? And my perception of ultra running is, that aerobic base and a certain amount of durability and adaptation by, ligaments and whatnot and impact
Yeah,
resiliency. So yeah, speak to that a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always kind of gravitated towards those more endurance-based sports. I like multi-day mountain bike races. Those are long kind of, 5, 6 hour stages as well. So, I think I've got clearly got a lot of, base over many years.
Hmm
And so I think that also lends itself to not necessarily needing to do a ton of volume now at the age that I'm at. I've got over a decade of training behind me.
hmm
So yeah, I think that certainly factors
Yeah,
into it.
and that durability piece that always fascinates me. Do you think that's something that you're born with or anybody can build? I recall you saying at some point that you had thicker Achilles tendons than the normal person, and you're a sports med doctor too. So,
Yeah,
um, are these adaptations that develop over time, or what are your thoughts on that piece for ultra?
yeah, I think it's a bit. I think it's two things. I think genetics definitely play a part.
Hmm
My so for example, my mum has had two knee replacements, and
Mm,
she was not particularly into any sports when she was younger. My dad, on the other hand, was a runner, ran marathons, half marathons, and he's had he had a knee scope and part of his meniscus taken out when he was younger, and yet he has absolutely no problems with his knees now.
mm,
He was yeah, he's in his late 70s, and
yeah.
when they're out here, we go hiking. I ask him, are your knees okay, Dad? And he has great knees. So I'm kind of hoping that I've got genetically his joints, which I seem
hmm
to at this point. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think those musculoskeletal adaptations that occur, they don't occur very quickly.
Hmm.
Um, the cardiorespiratory adaptations, the aerobic adaptations, they you can develop those in a matter of months, but the musculoskeletal stuff, I think, does take years and years and years to develop. So
Yeah.
I think developed a certain amount of robustness there.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
That's interesting, and you're a testament to it. And I think you do have the genetics of your dad so far. So that's good news for
Yeah,
you.
I hope it lasts. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'm switching gears a little bit towards the race you just finished. How many weeks are you out of completing Hard Rock? It was like 2 weeks ago or something now?
Yeah,
More?
yeah. I think we're into the third
Okay.
week out now. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And just for our listeners, maybe many of them are familiar with this race, but some might not be. It's 100 miles, 100, what's that, 161K.
yeah,
And then it's 11,000 or 11,000 feet or 3,300 meters on average, the elevation that you're
yeah,
at for that duration. And overall, you are doing 33,050 feet and over 10,000 meters of uphill. So that
yeah.
is a beast of a race, not your average ultra. Um,
It is. Yeah, it's an absolute
mhm,
beast. I mean, I think at this point, I think this was my 10th 100 miler
yeah,
that I've finished, and I have to say, nothing really compares to the difficulty of hard rock. For me, this was a whole step up from anything I've done previously.
previously.
So it definitely has its own challenges. Yeah.
And do you think that is because of the profile, Andy, like the amount of climbing, the altitude, or what other factors factored into that, getting that
Yeah.
title for you?
Yeah, I think just the pure amount of climbing, and the climbs are all very steep.
Mm,
Um, you're either going uphill or downhill. They're steep climbs. They're all big climbs. I think there's about 12 12 passes that we go over. They're all over 3,000 meters. They're all up above 12,000 feet. So clearly the altitude
hmm.
factors into that. Um, yeah, so yeah, just a huge amount, huge amount of
Huge.
the
Yeah,
goal. Yeah, the
for
average
sure.
finishing time is over 40 hours, which, for a lot of 100 milers, they have a cutoff of 30 hours, so
Yeah.
everybody's finished in 30 hours. The average
Uh-huh.
finishing time in hard rock's over 40. So
Sure.
it's a
So
beast
I
of a race. Yeah.
I know you've been wanting to get into this for a long time and it's a lottery system. So when you had your name called and you were super pumped to hear that you were in it and you saw the profile of the race or you've known it because we
Yeah.
have mutual friends who have done it. What was your first thoughts in terms of approach? So kind of 6 months to a year out, like long range to train for this beast.
Yeah. So I mean, living where I am and doing what I do, I'm kind of training pretty much all the time anyway.
Hmm.
Um, I think my approach to hard rock was a little bit unorthodox because I'd also qualified for the Boston Marathon this year. So
Right, I
what?
remember. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I had Boston coming up, and the lottery for hard rock is in December, in early December, and I was already kind of into my marathon training for Boston, which is in April.
Hmm.
Um, so I mean, my intent had been to, okay, I'm going to switch gears because and make hard rock the priority. But actually, I was having a really good road training block leading into Boston. And the road running conditions were actually perfect this winter. We didn't have a ton of snow. There was
Hmm.
dry pavement to run on. So so initially I was like, okay, hard rock training. And then honestly, I ended up drifting back into more the road training.
Hmm.
So I did a lot of speed work in the first few months of the year.
Yeah.
And then my plan was basically as soon as Boston was finished, um, get straight into a training block for hard rock. I knew that hard rock training would involve a lot of walking.
Hmm.
So if you've ever run a road marathon, you know how destroyed you are after that.
Hmm.
Everything is sore. I find it takes a ton of time to get over a road marathon, the two that I've done. So I knew that I could basically just start walking almost immediately. So I got straight into doing lots of
Hmm.
hiking the week after Boston. Yeah. And
Nice.
then I kind of, knowing the altitude, knowing the vertical gain in Hard Rock, I planned out my training based on vertical.
Okay.
I didn't worry too much about distance. I kind
Hmm.
of figured that I've done enough 100 milers that I'm good for the distance. But the elevation was the other factor. So, I planned out my week starting at, first week back, I'll try and get 1,000 meters in on that first weekend. And then the next week it was 2,000, 3,000.
Hmm.
And I built up to, I think my peak week was a little over 9,500 meters.
Wow. That's a
The
big
Evoke
week.
marathon. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
So
yeah.
when was the date of the Boston Marathon, just for reference?
So Boston, I think was I think it was about the 10th of April.
Okay, so April. So May and June, you worked on the vertical mileage
Yeah,
more.
May,
Hmm.
June, yeah, and then Hard
Yeah.
Rock in July. So it actually didn't give me a lot of um,
No.
time, but because because a lot of the training was hiking,
Hmm.
actually, I found that I didn't really need to have a down week at all. It was
Yeah.
just I could just actually build and keep building right up to the race. I mean,
Yep.
I tapered, for the week before the race, of course, but my usual thing is, build up for 3 weeks and then have a down week. But I found just because there wasn't a whole lot of impact. There was lots of walking that
Hmm.
I didn't need to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you say like January, February, March, like when you were training for the road marathon, what was your mileage ish per week, where roughly?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was probably up around about 100K most weeks.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. And not a lot of elevation, so really running. Yeah.
no, not a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
Boston's a hilly marathon, so we tried to do some hills, in the
Yeah.
training room, but yeah, nothing crazy.
Hmm. Yeah,
And of
that is
course the
a
mountains, and of course the mountains are all covered in snow at this point as well.
it
So
totally. Yeah.
it's hard to get
Yeah.
up high around here. Yeah.
Hmm. And mostly like zone two aerobic volume. You-
For
And
the marathon.
yeah, or you did a
Yeah.
lot of tempos and
Yeah.
mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I did a lot of so we did typically what I would do in the marathon build was I'd have 1 day a week. So typically on Tuesdays I'd do like a speed workout. So that'd be a shorter workout. Maybe with things like mile repeats, 2K repeats, some work on the track, and then I would usually do one long run on the weekend,
Hmm.
involved some
Good.
marathon pace stuff.
Yeah.
Feel like I
And did
got a lot of my running done, in that marathon build. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. And did you do any consistent strength throughout both phases?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
So typically, so usually twice a week, I
Okay.
have a reasonably well equipped home gym in my
Right.
basement.
Yeah.
Left
Good.
over from COVID, so I can get down there pretty easily.
Nice. Yeah. And so Andy came 39th overall and 29th in his division at Hard Rock, which I think is exceptionally good. But I always hesitate to say that because I like athletes to weigh in on how they feel about it, because as an outsider, that's my opinion. But yeah, how do
Yeah,
you feel about that, Andy?
I'm super happy. So,
Yeah.
um, my goal this first time, I mean, I really didn't know what I was in for. So the number one goal was to finish.
Hmm.
Uh, I had this kind of goal in my head. Maybe I can go 35 hours or under that. If I'm having a really good day, I ended up finishing 37 hours. So
Yeah.
wasn't wasn't too far off.
No.
The joke is in these big races, I'm always F11. I'm always the 11th woman. So which I was again.
Very good. You make a good 11th woman.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, but I'd actually like to have another go at it. The
Yeah.
painful memories fade quite quickly.
Yeah, that is remarkable. You guys have the the memories of a goldfish, like in Ted Lasso, the coach always
Yeah,
says.
exactly. Short memory.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so do you with the an unconventional training build, kind of maybe do you think that that was a good approach and it worked well for you? Maybe speak a little bit to the things that worked with doing a road running training. I mean, as a coach myself, I can think of your running economy and turnover and power and stuff would be quite good.
Yeah.
Did you feel that in the hard rock, the runnable sections? I'll let you
Yeah,
elaborate, but
I did, and probably in hard rock, I would say probably the section that felt best at and ran best was actually it's called Camp Bird Road, and I think it's about 18 kilometers, and it comes at about mile 30, I think 35, and it's a
mhm,
long downhill road for 18K. It's a dirt road, and I'd actually run it in the weeks before when we were out there, and I absolutely hated it just because it was hot, and it's just this long road section, and
mhm,
we've been doing all the stuff in the mountains and going over the passes, which is just beautiful. And then all of a sudden you hit this road and it just goes on and on and on. You run down
mhm,
into Ure, and I was actually dreading that section on race day because I'm like, this is going to be just awful. And
yeah,
I hit that road and I just started running really well, and I could almost switch off because it was totally non-technical. So
hmm,
so I think all the road running that I'd done earlier in the year probably helped me with my turnover, uh,
mhm,
running down
yeah,
that hill. Yeah, I mean, typically I'll take the approach for when training for one of these things, kind of almost a reverse periodized approach where as you get closer to the race, then obviously you get more and more specific. So
mhm,
for a race like Hard Rock, that's basically lots of walking, lots of uphill
right,
hiking. So that the faster running or the long consistent runs, actually a lot of that comes a bit earlier.
mhm,
So it almost worked out, quite well getting in all
yeah.
that road running training in the
In
months
the
that.
winter. Yeah. Yeah. And then I noticed that just via social media and chatting to you through work that you were down in at the Hard Rock race for quite a few weeks or days before. I was like, Andy's moved into his van. Um, can you speak to, I know you were really trying to follow an acclimatization kind of methodology and
Yeah,
maybe explain that to us and if you think it worked, what you would do again differently, that kind of thing. Hmm.
yeah, yeah. So I've actually traditionally been pretty terrible at altitude. You know, I've,
Hmm.
I've I've climbed a little bit in the Alps, Mont Blanc, and I've trekked in the Himalayas, and I usually feel pretty awful when I get up high. So so I work with Nordic teams here in Canmore, and so I actually have access to some great exercise physiologists and equipment.
Hmm.
I chatted to the biathlon team physiologist, and she gave me a little protocol involving a hypoxic tent. So I did sleep in a hypoxico tent for 3 weeks, I think, before we set off down to Colorado. So I started off at 2,500 feet,
Hmm.
2,500 meters rather. Yeah, 2,500 meters,
Yep.
and did that for a couple of nights, and then bumped it up to 3,000 meters, and then I basically slept at 3,000 meters for the 3 weeks in the hypoxic tent before leaving, and then we drove down to Colorado, and then immediately got up to Silverton, which is just under 10,000 feet. Uh,
Okay.
so we camped there, and I was there for 3 weeks before the race. So typically you'll need, I think ideal is 2 weeks, and three
Yep.
weeks is better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had plenty of time to acclimate, and I think on race day, I don't think the altitude really affected me at all. I
That's
felt good.
awesome.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The first few, so I did the tent. I mean, I probably didn't need to do the tent. I think if you're going down for 3 weeks before the start of the race, that's plenty of time to
Hmm.
acclimatize. But I wanted to get down there and immediately have some fairly good quality training,
Yep.
as opposed to arriving at 10,000 feet and feeling lousy for the first week. So
Hmm.
um, and I had a friend who was coming down, and we basically tried to hike a big chunk of the course over a few days so that I you know,
Perfect.
got
Hmm.
to look at it. So I didn't want to arrive and feel terrible. I mean, I didn't feel great for sure that first week arriving there and
Hmm.
hiking around, but come race day, I felt pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty substantial protocol, like 6 weeks kind of
Yeah.
working on the altitude, but
Yeah.
it seemed quite effective. I mean, if you can, why not, right? So it's
Yeah.
yeah.
And I've been trying to
Hmm.
get into the race for such a long time. I think this is my
Yeah.
12th year in the lottery to get in. So, I always said if I ever get into this
Yeah.
race, I'm going to take a month off work. Like I never take a month off
Yeah.
work. So I
Uh-huh.
so I took a so I was pretty excited taking an entire month off work and just focus on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I did which I think was quite useful. So I did some blood work before I started in the tent because I wanted to know
Hmm.
what my iron levels were. And
Oh, good.
again, traditionally, I've generally had pretty poor iron levels. So I think my ferritin was it was like 35, which is pretty awful. My
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
hemoglobin was 140, 142, which again isn't super high.
Yeah.
And so we have a nutritionist in our clinic. So Lindsay, so I chatted with her about altitude and
Mm-hmm.
all. And then I started on some iron supplements, and I took those right up to race day, actually.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Um, and then I actually did a blood test last week. I wanted to check
Mm-hmm.
my and there was a huge improvement. I think my ferritin had gone up to 98, uh,
Amazing.
and my hemoglobin had jumped up about 15, 20 points. So
Wow. So
certainly
you're
seemed to get a good bump from the altitude and the iron.
yeah, reaping the benefits of that big altitude block that was
Yeah,
painful. But
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
for reference, just for our listeners, Andy lives in Canmore, which is 1,300 meters or 4,200 feet. So not low. I mean, sorry, not sea level low, but not
Yeah.
Colorado high. So yeah,
Yeah, I think it helps a little, and certainly, running Boston at sea level,
yeah,
you definitely feel the
feel
benefits
the bump.
of
Yeah.
living in Canmore.
Hmm.
But yeah, quite different to
Yeah.
mountains in Colorado.
For sure. No, that's a really interesting kind of specificity phase. And then was it just mostly for the training portion, easy walks?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So we did what's known as the soft, we did our version of what's called soft rock, which
Yep.
has become pretty popular, and that's essentially trying to hike the
Mm-hmm.
entire course. We actually didn't end up doing the entire course just because it involved this ridiculous car shuttle.
Sure.
Um, it would have involved my wife driving our van for 10 hours that day, which I
Gross. That's
I
too
didn't want to.
much.
Yeah, I didn't want to have to do that. So, but
Yeah.
I would say I probably covered about 80% of the course ahead of time.
Good.
And it
Yeah.
was first, yeah, we hiked all the climbs, and I did it with my friend Mike Nash from Canmore, and
Nice.
we jogged, we jogged some of the flats
Yeah.
and jogged the descents, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that was really helpful.
Yeah, and I know we at Evoke we use heart rate a lot for monitoring our training. Did you notice, were you wearing a heart rate monitor? And did you notice what were some things you noticed about your heart rate kind of leading up and with the altitude at Hard Rock? And
Yeah.
did you use it as a metric at all, or
I
what did you use?
Yeah, I did. I definitely I tracked my heart rate, and I actually my watch can track, my Garmin can track SpO2 as well.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah,
That's cool.
so I did keep an eye on those things. And HRV, my watch gives me a heart
Yeah.
rate variability as well. So what I found when we first got there is my resting heart rate was higher. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
my my exercising heart rate was quite a bit higher. Uh,
Interesting. Yep.
SpO2 overnight, I mean, I was dropping down below 90%. It's, for a reference, normal is, typically here in Canmore, I'm, 94, 95, 96%
Sure. Yeah.
all night long. So I was dipping down below 90%, and my HRV tanked to start
Mm.
with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then actually, as we were there longer, and as we progressed through the soft rock, it was amazing just watching HRV came up, resting heart rate came down, my SpO2
Nice.
values started improving. And then by race day, I would say my numbers were completely normal. Uh,
Mm, mm-hmm.
so I was trying to, on the climbs, I was trying initially, this was during the soft rock, I was trying to keep my heart rate in zone 2. No, I didn't want to pop up
Yeah.
into zone 3 at all.
3.
But I had to go pretty slow to achieve that. Uh,
Yeah, for sure.
and then,
Yeah.
yeah, so, and again, I wanted to see where my heart rate was for race
Hmm.
day. So I could set myself some parameters not to go out too hard,
Yeah.
which
No,
worked quite well. Yeah.
that kind of monitoring, I think, would be very interesting for you because in hindsight, if you hadn't done the acclimatization of 3 weeks, imagine if you had decided I'll come just do 10 days, you
Yeah.
would have been racing with your HRV terrible, your O2, all of these things. So it
Yes.
kind of affirms your plan was the right one.
Yeah, and it was kind of cool to just look at the
Yeah.
graph and just look at this stuff improving. Like my
Hmm.
HRV, it took this huge dip and then just gradually climbed back up to normal values. So that was kind
Right. Yeah.
of yeah,
No, that is interesting.
yeah,
As a coach too, because you'll likely coach many ultra runners. So now you even have a bigger wheelhouse to help advise and train people
yeah,
if they have the luxury to go 3 weeks ahead. But
yes, yeah,
yeah, good. And then the race itself, I know we've been talking about so much leading up, but
yeah.
yeah, can you just talk a little bit about uh, more the physical side about how it went? And I know you had a number of pacers with you too, maybe the role that
Yeah,
plays. And for our viewers, like kind of the rules around that too, as an outsider.
yeah,
I, I don't know, like, is there sections they can pace or not? Just walk us
yeah.
through a little bit of the event. Hmm.
Yeah, so you can have a pace. So most people can have a pacer from so this was a clockwise year. They changed the direction every year. This was clockwise. So this year pacers could jump in at year A, which was mile 43, and you can have a pacer to the finish. They can jump in at various points. You can't jump in at every aid station, but so you can switch out pacers at different places. Um, if you interestingly, I didn't know this. If you're over 65, you can have a pacer from the start, which is kind of a cool way to do hard rock. So if you're over 65 and you want to do hard rock, you need to find somebody who you know
Wants to do a lot of
wants
running
wants
with
to
you.
do it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I had paces. I had a bunch of friends um, Canmore and Adam Campbell
Hmm.
came down to pace me. He has some history with hard rock as well, so he paced a section. So I had four paces, um, and
Does it
yeah,
help having the pacer,
I think
Andy?
I think it
Yeah.
does. I mean, I think the word pacer is a little bit of a misnomer. I mean,
Right.
to be honest, at that point, you're just doing what you can do.
The
They're not,
moral supporter.
yeah, they're not pacing anything. They're just there to distract you and have conversation and,
Hmm.
talk you out of some tough spots. So I really like having paces. I know some people kind of a lot of the European races don't have paces.
Mm.
It seems like it's more of a North American thing, but yeah, I like having paces. Um, so yeah, I got my first pacer. It always gives you a lift as well. When I'm running into year A and you're feeling pretty tired and a little
Yeah.
beaten up, and then and then you got to pay. So all of a sudden you got somebody with you.
Yes.
It's conversation. You have some
Yeah.
drinks on the way. So it
Sure.
definitely gives you a boost. And
Yeah.
then and then they switch out, and then you got somebody else, and you get a whole other set of
Hmm.
conversations that you have. So
Yeah.
I like having
Well,
pace.
we're throwing around the word pacing and pacer.
Yeah,
What metrics? This is the question I always get from athletes is like, how do I know how fast to go? Like every
yeah.
time, any distance. So what did you use for your pacing? Hmm.
Right. So early on in the race, so I've again, 100 miles after a certain point, you're not, you're just doing what you can do. You're just trying to keep moving forward.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
so, after 5 or 6 hours, you're just doing whatever it is that you can do.
Yeah.
Pacing kind of goes out the window. So I like using metrics early on in the race. And
Hmm.
and the main reason is just to stop myself from going out too hard, which is the classic ultra
Yeah.
marathon mistake. You're super fit, you're well tapered, you're
Hmm.
excited.
Excited.
Yeah, and you go out at a pace that feels really, really easy, but it's
Hmm.
actually a bit too hard. And then of course you
Yeah.
tank. So that's the
Hmm.
classic mistake. So I went out. I mean, I had the luxury that I'd done that whole the whole section that I was going to be on my own. I'd done it previously in my soft rock, so
Mm-hmm.
uh, I knew what I was in for. So I actually just used my heart rate. Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I um I knew I
Good.
wanted to walk all the climbs and just jog the flats. So I used my heart rate. I kept my heart rate below
Mm-hmm.
in my zone two. I didn't want to pop above 150, which is top of my zone two. And
Yeah.
I kept, yeah, a couple of times I glanced down and I was kind of getting up towards 150. And I'm like, oh, okay, time to just back off a little bit.
Back down.
And it
Yeah.
did feel ridiculously easy and slow. Yeah.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
I think that's how you get it. You get a
For
finish.
sure. And how did you deal with, I mean, this was a goal race, look, and you've done them before, but looking around and, you know, eighth and ninth place girl is way ahead of you or whatever. Like, how do you deal with that FOMO piece and the tug that's like, I want to go
Yeah.
faster. Uh-huh.
Yeah. I think you just have to trust it. You
Yeah.
just have to trust it. Trust your experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, because I didn't have any kind of specific place goal or anything like this,
Yeah.
my main goal was to finish. I was more than happy just to tug
Sure.
along my own pace. It was funny at one point, there was another, I caught up to a girl in front of me, who I won't say her name, but another Canadian runner, and
Mm-hmm.
we got talking, and I knew who she was, and it turned out she knew who I was, and then she went, "Oh my God, if you're with me, I am going way too fast." So she was running really easily, right? So
Yeah.
she immediately slowed down,
Sure.
um, and backed off, and she ended up finishing, I'm fairly sure. Yeah.
Oh, good. That is
So
good
yeah,
for
no. So
sure.
I didn't go chasing anybody down. And
Yeah.
it's interesting, in that first 10, 15 miles, I would say the people that I ended up, being around,
Mm-hmm.
you're chatting and meeting people, and uh those same people were with me the entire race. I
Interesting.
I
Yeah.
say there was probably like five or six other
Yeah.
runners that I got to
Yeah.
know quite well in the early stages, and
Sure.
we all finished round about the same time. So
Right. Yeah.
it's
Kind
kind
of
of fun.
that's part of the neat uniqueness of the ultra running.
Yeah,
It seems like a journey and you do bond with people around you and it's kind of interesting
yeah.
that way. But
And there were a
I
couple of
was
there were a
mhm.
couple of super experienced runners as well in
Yeah.
that group as well. And
Oh, good.
there's this one guy, I think he had five or six hard rock finishes, and
Yeah.
we're going up the first climb up Putnam, and he was like, "All right, guys, this is the perfect pace to get a hard rock finish." And
Hmm.
we were just walking, having a conversation. I mean, it was pretty slow.
Yeah, but
So
that's encouraging because if they
it
have
was
experience, yes,
exactly to know
for
that these
sure.
people who had
Yeah.
many finishes were doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when did it switch for you in this race from like minding the pace, making sure you're going slow enough to survival zone where the heart rate is kind of out the window a bit and you're just like plogging to completion. Was that later in the race or
It
like
was,
how many
I would,
miles?
I would say for me, I had a bit of a tough patch at about, oh, probably 25 to 30 miles in, which isn't that
Oh,
far, but
no.
it's not that far, but it was quite a warm day, and
Okay.
Hard Rock has, it's often quite a long way between the aid stations,
Sure.
and a big climb up Oscar's Pass, I kind of ran out of water, and there's no creeks
Ugh.
in that
Yeah.
section as well. I ran with a filter, which most people do, because there's
Hmm.
lots of, I think they said there were 84 creek crossings in Hard Rock.
Wow. That's a lot.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So everybody runs with a filter, but I ran out of water, and I think I got a little dehydrated, and it was super hot. So I
Hmm.
had a little bit of a low spot there. And then it improved
Yeah.
at the next aid station. And then I was pretty good till Handy's Peak. So Handy's Peak is the highest point in the course, goes over
Okay.
14,000 feet.
Yeah. It's high.
Um, yeah, and it was dark, and that's where the wheels came off for quite a few hours.
Yeah. happens.
Yeah, I got nauseated, and I actually think it was partly due to getting a little dehydrated and behind on fluids earlier on.
Yeah.
Um, and then I was so nauseated I couldn't keep a gel down. I
Hmm.
usually do pretty well with gels.
Yeah.
So I had a couple of little side of the trail vomiting episodes.
Oof. Yeah.
But I was with Adam going over there, and
Oh, good.
he cracked the whip pretty hard, and coaxed me over the top. And actually, once I got over the top of Handy's and started descending, I actually feel like I went pretty well to the finish.
Came around. That's
It all
good.
came
Yeah.
around. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look at your data from the race, because I'm sure you have it on your watch, um, do you could you towards the end, were you maintaining similar heart rates as the start, or does it just like really drop off? I'm
My
kind of,
heart,
yeah,
yeah,
curious.
yeah. My heart rate tanked. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I,
So I think my average heart rate for the entire race, well, I
mhm.
looked it up actually earlier. It was
Yeah.
118,
Okay. Nice,
which
nice long walk for you.
it was a nice low one. Yeah, 118
Uh,
was my average heart rate. Whereas,
yeah.
and I think it maybe rose a little bit towards the end, the last
Yeah.
mile or two, there's maybe it climbs
Hmm.
up because, I was
Yeah.
super excited and I picked the pace up in the last couple of miles.
Totally. Yeah.
So heart rate went up, but the rest of the time it was just, yeah, it was low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, your observation of some of the elites, although I mean they were not in sight, but would you think if you pulled up Cordy DeWalter's heart rate profile or something that they would be able to maintain throughout, or is that kind of a universal phenomenon just because of the duration?
Yeah, I think everybody is going to see that decline in their
Right.
heart rate,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
a greater or lesser extent. Yeah,
Hmm.
I suspect, and I haven't looked at any of their data, but I suspect the elites who are running hard at the front of the field, they probably maintain higher heart rates for longer.
Hmm.
Um,
We should hop on and look at
we
Tom's
should,
since
yeah,
after the call. Uh,
we should,
yeah.
and I think some of that's some of that is, there's certainly some myocardial fatigue that actually happens. We know that our
Sure.
heart muscle can actually fatigue in these super long efforts.
Yeah.
There are changes in heart structure during an ultra marathon. We actually, um, there are changes in the chamber size and the ability
Hmm.
of the heart to actually pump blood. This actually has been well
Wow.
documented
Huh.
in races. And actually, if you do an echocardiogram on somebody immediately post ultra, you actually, there's some pretty scary things that you can see going on in
Huh.
there. You definitely have quite a bit of heart muscle dysfunction.
Is
So
that due to fatigue? Like your whole body
yeah,
is fatigued and your heart's a muscle. So yeah.
exactly. Yeah, a lot of that is
Hmm.
just pure fatigue. Yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, it's super fascinating.
it is.
Yeah, and I do find it interesting to look at the data with the people who are running and like almost half the time sometimes.
Oh,
And and most of our everybody else and it's yeah
I
the
know.
what separates it and kind of on a nerdy heart rate data level. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
it's absolutely incredible how, and I'll just say this, it's almost mind-blowing how quick the leaders
Yeah,
finished the race. Ludo Pomeray, who won, it was a course record, 21 hours. I mean, I finished in the top third of the
sure.
field,
Yeah, which is
and
amazing. Yeah,
I was 16 hours behind him.
I know
It's
it is
crazy.
mind blowing. It is. It's absolutely mind. Yeah,
It
it
is. Yeah.
baffling. Hmm.
Yeah. When I
Hmm.
was going over Handy's Peak in the middle of the night, he was close to finishing.
Right. Yeah.
It blows my mind how quick some
And as a competitor there and a coach, what are your thoughts? What are a few things? Why do you think they're so much faster?
yeah, I mean, obviously, he's a professional. That's all he dedicates all of his time
For
to.
sure.
He doesn't have to have a 9 to 5 job like I do.
Hmm.
He he can, he can lie in the morning. He can sleep as much as, sleep with a great performance enhancer. I'm sure he gets as much sleep as he wants.
Yeah.
And he just trains. That's
Yeah.
his. So, but yeah, I mean, and obviously there's some just natural, that all of these
Abilities.
guys have,
Yeah.
they're all incredibly talented. You know,
Hmm.
you can't just think that this is all training. And these people yeah, that they have,
Genetically gifted
yeah,
in a sense.
absolutely.
Well, our mutual friend who paced you, Adam, he came, what did he come? Fourth or
Third,
third?
yeah,
Third.
he's been third, I think, a couple of times. Yeah,
Yeah. And Adam has a history of being an elite runner for years, or triathlon too, prior to going into ultra. So I mean that those kind of adaptations and training and history all transfer. And I think that's a big piece. As
yeah,
older athletes who get into sports, the goal is always to do the best you can do because you're essentially playing catch up that you could never catch up to with people who have started in adolescence, certain sports. That's my
yeah.
perception. Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
absolutely agree. Obviously training is a huge piece of it, right? And but
Yeah.
training will only, training will only take you so far. You need to have some natural ability, some natural
For
talent
sure.
to be
Yeah.
at the top echelons. Yeah.
The top. And it's so fun to see those performances. It's
Oh,
crazy. Hmm.
incredible.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
tell you a little story. So Mike Nash and I had finished our first soft rock day there. We'd struggled a little bit with the altitude, but we had a great day out. I think we'd done like, I don't know, 38K or 35K, something like this. And we dropped back into Silverton, and we were sitting by my van having a beer, reminiscing on our huge day that we'd had. And then in comes down the trail Ludo Pomeray and Camille Bruyas, who I think was second in the women's race. And
Hmm.
somebody else, another elite run. I can't remember who it was. Anyway, they came charging down the trail. They were just moving so well. They came in, said hi, and Mike and I kind of commented, we're like, oh yeah, they've probably only done like 10K in speed in there. Anyway,
Yeah.
I pulled up Ludo's Strava that
Oh
night,
no.
and I
Yeah.
think they'd done like 55K, and
Oh my.
and they were just charging in. So yeah,
Yeah.
they're a whole different level. Yeah.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. No.
And he's in his
Uh,
40s. He's actually in his 40s, the guy who won. Yeah.
yeah, that's impressive. I don't know that much about him. I'll have to research his training history. I'm always fascinated by that stuff. But
This was so he's never started the hard rock race, but he in the 2 weeks prior to the race, he did two soft rocks. He ran the whole course
wow,
twice. So race day was the third time in the 3 weeks he'd done it. So
that's incredible.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, just awesome. Yeah, I wanted to touch on two more things. I know we don't want this to go too long, but nutrition. So maybe we can talk about
yeah,
that, and then we'll get into a little bit of more of just your personal experience with it. So,
yeah,
um, nutrition, if you can just good, bad things that went well,
yeah.
things that didn't. Hmm.
So so I think, like I mentioned, I had a consult with a nutritionist at our clinic, and she was super helpful. So she
Yeah.
talked about things like increasing my fluid intake at altitude.
Okay.
When you get to altitude, there's a natural diuretic effect, which means that you start peeing out more.
Hmm.
So you do need to increase your fluid intake. Of course, you're breathing harder at altitude. The air's dry. You're losing fluid in your breath. So
Yeah.
increased fluid intake was important. So I tried pushing that. Um, there's also an increase in your basal metabolic rate. So even just at rest at altitude,
Mm,
you do burn more calories.
yeah.
Um, Lindsay calculated, I've got her chart here. She sent me. So she calculated that basically at rest, I was going to be burning an additional 300 to 400 calories per day.
Wow. That's
So
a lot. Yeah.
yeah. So she said, just, she talked to me about just being cognizant of taking that into account and eating more. And
Hmm.
often your appetite at altitude is blunted as well.
Declines.
You've
Yeah.
probably seen this. And
Hmm.
also with exertion, often that blunts the appetite. So I was kind of cognizant about trying to eat more calories, particularly carbohydrate. Um,
Hmm.
so I tried to push the carbs. a bit more. And then yeah, race day, I typically do pretty well with mostly liquid calories. So I
Oh, good.
carry carry calories in my bottles and eat gels, and I find I can usually stomach that pretty well.
That's
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
I get a bit sick of it later on, but
Hmm.
I can generally tolerate those quite well. So I went with I had Tailwind in my
Yep.
bottles. I had some knack drink in my bottles, and and I went with gels all the
Yeah.
way.
And
So
kind of the standard, like people are aiming for 80 to 100 with your
yeah,
size, maybe grams per hour. And what did you
yeah,
like 700 mils of water or something, or 500, or what did you?
yeah. So so I tried to go for uh 700 mils of fluid
Mm,
per hour, which wasn't always possible just because of how far it was in between aid
sure.
stations, creeks, and what have you. But I
Yeah.
tried to push that as best I can. I made sure at aid stations that I would, grab a mug and just try and chug a whole load of
Chug.
extra fluid then. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then yeah, the carbohydrates. So I mean, the latest guidelines are suggesting you can push from 90 to 120, even higher grams
I
of
would get so sick. I wish I could be a
Yeah,
carb machine, but
I
I
know.
don't know.
For me, I did train that, when I was doing my
Yeah,
training runs prior, I was trying to push the carbs, and I can certainly in training runs, 5, 6 hours, I can do 90 grams of carbs an hour, but
sure.
it actually becomes just technically difficult to carry that much
For sure.
in
Uh-huh.
between on long sections. And race day, my goal was to be sort of 60 grams and upwards if
Yeah.
possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
maintained that for a big chunk of it. It
Hmm.
fell off a bit at the end for sure, but
And were you happy with your nutrition plan? It didn't fall off a cliff at any points, kind of. I mean, other than when you vomited, but
yeah. No, that was
uh-huh.
yeah, so that
That's
was
good.
just that one section through the
Yeah.
night where I couldn't keep anything down, and the thought of literally anything was making me feel nauseated. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, once that passed, I mean,
That's good.
I was back onto
Yeah.
gels again.
Yeah.
I was eating gels on the final descent. So
Sure. Yeah. And
it
did
worked
you
pretty
do
well.
any caffeine, or were you
Did yeah.
careful with that? Okay.
Yeah, so I avoided caffeine until the night section.
Sure.
So yeah, I didn't do it. I mean, I had coffee in the morning. That's kind
Yeah.
of my usual pretty
Sure.
regular. So I had my coffee in the morning, and then I stayed away from caffeine until it was dark. Yeah.
And did you sleep at all during the race?
No.
No, just kept moving. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
I was going to take a short nap at the top of the final climb. I was with my pacer Martine was going up, and I said, Martine, I'm really tired. I'm just going to take like a 3-minute nap at the top. And then Carl Meltzer was behind me, and I really wanted I really wanted to finish ahead of him.
Sure.
So
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 since no nap.
so we
Uh-huh.
ditched the idea of the nap because he was coming up pretty fast.
Good. Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good motivator for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long time to be awake though, 37 hours. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
and I woke
Hmm.
up 2 hours before race started. It starts at 6
Okay.
a.m. So I was actually up at 4. So it was
Crazy.
yeah, it was over
Yeah,
48.
that's a lot. That was a lot. Yeah. So can you share with us kind of one of the highest moments and then maybe one of the lowest moments, and then in those lows, like what gets you through? So I think that's interesting for people. Courtney talks about her chiseling her pain cave. You're
Uh,
from Britain. Maybe you have, I don't know, a bangers and mash and beer visualization. Kidding.
yeah, what gets you through? I mean, it's a great question. Hey, why do you do it and what gets you through? I mean, for me, I mean, for me, I like the whole challenge of it. I think we live in a world where everything is geared to make life easier. You
Hmm.
know, you don't even have to leave your house. You call DoorDash and they'll bring a burger around. This kind of thing. Life is getting easier and easier. So I mean, I do think there's a certain amount of value in doing hard things. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, so I mean, I obviously like the challenge. What are some high? I mean, my low point was clearly was suffering up Handy's peak.
Yeah,
Just feeling absolutely wretched um,
sure.
for about 5, 6 hours, and having Adam shouting at me to get up and get going. Let's get going. He'd give me a little bit of tough love, but
Yeah.
which in hindsight was great because it
Mm-hmm.
got me moving. So that was definitely the low point. I mean, what was the high? I mean, the high point I think was just, I mean, the finish is so iconic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and I ran down the final descent. I actually passed two people. So Carl Meltzer actually overtook me on
Mm-hmm.
the final descent, and then we caught him near the bottom of that descent, and I passed him, and I said to Martin, who was pacing me, I'm like, let's just keep going.
Yeah.
So we ran pretty well, and then we passed somebody else actually. So I made up two places in the last couple of miles, and then
Uh-huh.
you run to the town, and then all of the whole crew, so my wife,
Sure.
my dog
Yeah.
Merge, all our friends were there, and then they
Mm-hmm.
ran the last mile into
Uh,
town, and then you get to go kiss the rock. So
yeah.
it was pretty
Pretty
moving, and
big high. Yeah.
I felt
Yeah.
like, for me, that race was really the culmination of every other 100 miler that I've done
Sure.
because they were all leading to that event.
Yeah.
And, I've said this
Yeah.
to some of my athletes as well, especially if they have a bad race, I'm like, you got to remember that the race is really just a celebration of everything that went beforehand. You
Mm-hmm.
put in all the work.
Yeah.
That's what you're celebrating. And the race is really just it's the icing on the cake. But
For sure.
it was a
Yeah.
pretty cool moment to kiss the rock finally.
Yeah.
Oh,
I could see that being very emotional and exciting
yeah.
all at the same time. And
Yeah, and I was very
y-
emotional at the start. Actually, I had tears in my eyes on the start line because I was like,
yeah,
God,
I know.
I
I
watched so many videos of it, and there I was.
uh-huh.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to that. This winter at the start of the World Cup final for the teams race
yeah,
at one of the World Cups, and we'd never made an A final before. And they announce you, and you walk through with your buddy, like holding hands or something weird. But, anyways, um, I was like, I have to race in 3 minutes, pull it together. But it just all the emotion of
I know.
finally being at a place that you've wanted for a long time. It's magic and surprising, and I think that's
Yeah,
a
it was.
beautiful part of
Yeah,
our sports. Hmm.
I was stood there at the start line, and honestly, I was choking up a little bit. I had tears in my eyes, and
Yeah,
Sarah, my wife, the British girl, she's like,
yeah,
pull it together, pull it together. What are you doing?
yeah, yeah.
So
That's good.
anyway, it was
Yeah,
it was quite moving. Yeah,
yeah. No, you call. I think you affectionately call Sarah the crew boss. Is that the?
she's the crew
Yeah,
chief. Yeah, she
yeah,
knows.
and
She's very experienced at that job. She's
mm-hmm.
talked me out of the chair a few times.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
wear the chair, but the crew chief is really good at saying the right thing to me at the right time.
Yeah, that's special. That's grateful. I'm sure you're so grateful to have a partner like that
Oh,
who
absolutely,
supports
absolutely.
and
She's very, very
can
supportive.
give
Yeah,
you a kick in the butt too here and there. So
totally.
that's
Oh
really
yeah,
special. Yeah,
yeah. I could
yeah.
tell you a few things she's whispered in my ear to get me out of a chair, but it wouldn't be fit for the podcast.
Fair enough, fair
You
enough.
need an
Yeah.
R rating. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's the beauty of having maybe a partner or a best friend or somebody be that crew chief. They know
yeah,
how to push you and they know you. So that's cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, good. So, I mean, the age-old question at the end of every a big event, which everyone hates, is what are you thinking of next,
What
Andy? Or
next?
like, no,
So yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know how many times I said in during Hard Rock to whoever was pacing me at the time, I was like,
I'm
oh,
retiring. Just
oh man,
kidding.
this sucks. This is my last 100. I said this I think to three different paces. 100
Hmm.
miles is so hard. I'm never doing this again. I never want to do this again.
Yeah.
And of course, I finished, and the next day, the pain is already starting to fade, and
Hmm.
now to become a true hard rocker, you really have to do the course in both directions.
Well, there you go.
So
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna put my name in the lottery again.
Awesome. I think
But
that's
we'll see.
great. And we'll be watching and hopefully you get in again. But
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
So
thanks for your insight and your time on this. And yeah, we'll be following your training progression. And Andy's a coach with Evoke and he's written some articles and other tips and podcasts. So look them up, and people can follow you at Canmore MD.
Canmore MD, yeah, that's
Yeah,
my Instagram and
great.
Twitter. Yeah, thank you.
Super. Thanks,
This was
Andy.
fun. That was fun,
Yeah,
Kylee. Thanks.
that was okay.